In all, 24 people were saved that day by the men on the Wade, including 11-year-old Catherine Gallagher, who nearly 100 years later remembered her rescue vividly.
I've seen the fire and I ran, and this man grabbed a hold of me and took me over to the railing and hoisted me over, and that was the end of it. I just got off it in time.
There were a lot of heroic incidents there. People that risked their lives to save the lives of those involved. The best of human nature and the worst.
Oh yes, I gathered that the police were excellent, and a lot of the boats were. But of course then a lot of them were not, because it was that business of give me your jewelry if you want to be saved, you know, and that sort of thing.
Stories persist that some victims were approached by what they thought were rescue vessels, only to be looted and pushed back into the river.
We were almost to North Brother Island when the rail gave way and many people tumbled into the water.
I don't know whether I dropped or whether I was pushed fighting
off.
Like mad to leap into the water.
He lost his hold of my hand. The last I saw of him, the look on his face was terrible.
I found myself struggling against the water.
Even then, the fire was so near me that my hands and face were scorched and blistered.
The most awful thing was the babies.
Around me were a score of bodies.
I looked back after we'd left the burning boat, and I could see lots of them lying in the flames. It seemed to me that I sank hundreds of feet, and that I should never come to the surface. Pulling each other down. Then my strength failed me. I stopped struggling and didn't seem to care any longer whether I ever rose to the top. Pretty soon they would lie still, and I knew they were dead.
As the Slocum approached North Brother Island, the crew gave up any hope of saving their ship.
Let's go! Abandon ship! Get out of here! Get out!
We lost! Beach at North Brother! Beach at North Brother!
His original decision to beach it up here on North Brother Island, if it had worked out, would have been fine, but he wanted to bring it right in, and what happened was the current took the stern of the boat, where most of the people were, out in the deeper water. And of course the bow was covered with flames and everything, and then the fire was going back. This is the exact spot where the Slocum beached. We hear a lot with the World Trade disaster, ground zero. Well, this is the ground zero of the Slocum, right here on this beach.
Some of the more extraordinary stories of heroism come from the people on North Brother Island who were working their everyday jobs in this hospital that was for sufferers of contagious diseases. And this was a common thing in New York, to put these contagious disease hospitals on the islands near Manhattan.
Doctors, nurses, even patients came running out of the Riverside Quarantine Hospital to save as many as possible.
Now they, like a lot of the people on board the vessel, don't know how to swim. And so one of the nurses noticed that there were ladders up against the hospital where they had been doing some repair work. She lugged these 100-pound ladders, 35 feet each, into the water, and they then used those to extend out into the water to save as many people as they could.
And they said that at one time they were pulling bodies out about one a minute. They brought them up and they laid them out on the grass outside of the hospital.
10:30, half an hour after the first alarm had been heard on deck.
I saw old pictures and I wondered why there were so many barrels around. And then I found out it was the old way of resuscitating people. They'd put them over a barrel and try to do it that way.
People who started out as rescuers, pulling live babies, pulling children and adults to the shore or onto the boats, in about 10 or 15 minutes into this rescue operation, suddenly realized there's nobody left to save. Now they're recoverers, and their job is a far more grim and far greater task in terms of volume.
The bodies, they sink and then they come up again. They found them floating all the way down the river, and they also think some of them may have been carried out to sea.
Every time a boat came in with people on it, I ran over to look for my mother, but she was dead.
We lost 2 sisters, 2 cousins, and 2 aunts. My mother and I were saved on a boat. My father went with my uncle to look for the children. They found Anna, but they never found Helen. He was beside himself that he couldn't find the child. I don't know whether it was anger so much as just sheer grief.
What fascinated me as soon as the 9/11 happened, that the reactions were the same. Grief apparently doesn't change, and the grief that I see in people today was the same horror in the days of the General Slocum. One historian, Professor Ken Jackson, Columbia University, figured that the difference in the population in 1904 in the country and the population today, that the Slocum was as much of a disaster in relationship to the population of the United States as the World Trade is to us today. A record was broken in 9/11, a record that I hope will never be broken again. 22 acres of abandonment, history and abandonment.
Today, North Brother Island is frozen in time. A stark reminder of the suffering witnessed on its shores in June 1904. Ghostly images of the dead and the heartbroken, trapped forever in the crumbling walls of the abandoned hospital buildings and the overgrown vegetation. But the General Slocum tragedy did not end there. The subsequent shockwaves would destroy more lives, causing the New York City neighborhood of Little Germany to disappear forever. On the 15th of June, 1904, women and children fought for their lives in plain sight of the New York City skyline. For 10 long minutes, the steamship General Slocum churned the waters near North Brother Island. A few found safe harbor, but for every survivor, 10 more perished, and some would never be found. Rescue now turned to reclamation. Diver Charles Everett was charged with retrieving bodies from the ruins of the Slocum at the bottom of the East River.
The wreck was complete, absolute. I crawled gingerly through the gloomy, disemboweled section to amidships. I thought I had my nerves under control, but I only had a foretaste of the real extent of this calamity. There were at least 80 charred and pitiful, distorted bodies of women and children in the center of the vessel. They tell me I was down in the tomb about an hour and a half. That must be a mistake. I was down there a year.
Given the incredible number of people killed in the tragedy, the city officials realized they couldn't just simply send them to the city morgue because it was far too small. So they designate the pier right next to the morgue called the Charities Pier, big open space where they can put the maximum number of bodies on display and allow the maximum number of grieving relatives to get in there and make the positive identifications.
One of the most horrible scenes must have been at the temporary morgue, where people came in to identify the dead. They say there were suicides there. People jumped off the pier. They had nothing to live for, you know.
My father, he hadn't taken his clothes off for at least a week looking for the children. He found Anna, but he never found Helen. These are the shoes that my sister Anna wore the day of the Slocum, and they were found on her at the time her body was recovered.
When I got home that night, my brother and sister were in the casket already. My mother, she wasn't identified till the next day. I wore black for a whole year.
I know.
Black hair, ribbons, everything was black.
And this is the dress I wore when I was a year and a half old, dedicated the monument under which the unidentified dead are buried, and where I assume my sister is buried.